Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the Betaya program with your host Tariq. Today we'll explore and analyze the growing presence of China in United Nations system. Let me introduce Ms. Talita Pinotti from State University of Brazil. Talita, thank you so much for joining, and you are most welcome in program.
Thank you, Tariq. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Tarita, the year 2021 marks the 50th anniversary of People's Republic of China entrance in the United Nations system. How has China's position in the UN changed over the time? How would you explain this?
Yes, thank you. This is a very good question, actually, because most people think that China has always been this great player at the UN, always leading initiatives and imposing their views. But actually, this was hardly the case until recently when China decided to step up. So, in my view, China has evolved its position towards the UN and towards a greater engagement. Assuming new compromises and really becoming the player that other countries expected China to be. And actually, I argue that we can consider three main phases of China's engagement in the United Nations. The first one, which I like to call isolation, and it's from 1971, when China actually replaced the Republic of China in the UN to 2000. In this period, China recognized the importance of being at the UN, of participating, of at least trying to be a part of multilateral negotiations, but it also saw the UN as the result of Western values and the Western agenda. So even if China was there and was present at negotiations, it really tried not to engage so hard. For example, in the Security Council, China usually decided to abstain in important negotiations or agenda items. And if we consider peacekeeping operations, which is another good example of this isolation, China even refused to pay its contributions because at that time it saw PKOs as a Western tool of intervention. So as we can see, it was this get-to-know phase where China was trying to understand more the United Nations, but was not ready to really be a leader. The second phase, which I believe we can call rapprochement, it's from 2000 to 2013. And it's when China actually starts to engage more, it starts to host some conferences, enter in some international agreements. We start to see a China that is more open to multilateralism, and especially to the UN, to the idea of interacting with other countries and actually cooperating with them. But in this phase, China still refrains from taking the lead in debates. So that's the period when, for example, we usually saw the Chinese representative in the room, but it was definitely not the one leading negotiations or speaking up or maybe trying to centralize discussion. It was in the side of negotiations. And finally, the third phase, which is the active engagement phase, from 2014 onwards. It's our current phase, when China decides to actively participate on negotiations. It actually starts to make statements that shows a different China, a China that is willing to be the leader of multilateralism. For example, China decided to increase its contributions to the UN's budget, and it has even become the second largest contribution, lagging behind only the United States, which is significant. Second, it tries to add new language to the UN resolutions. So we see, for example, China trying to advance the term mutual benefits to some of the UN resolutions, or even mentions to the Belt and Road Initiative. So it's a different phase, it's a different type of engagement from the Chinese government with the United Nations. And the acknowledgement of these phases, I think it brings us a better understanding of China's interests and its engagement in the UN, and how and why it is actually engaging with the UN. The China we see right now is willing to, let's say, share the burden of offering international public goods and fostering international cooperation.
How important is the United Nations to Chinese foreign policy? How would you explain this?
Considering this last phase that I just explained about, I believe that at this point the UN is key to China's foreign policy for many reasons, but some of them I think they are extremely important to understand why China is so concerned with the UN at this point. First, China's role in this institution, which is a distinctive one. China, for example, has a permanent seat in the Security Council, which we all know it's the most important organ in the United Nations. So China naturally has a different position in the United Nations, which of course can bring some advantages along the way. The UN is much more democratic in terms of voting powers than, for example, so the second reason is decision making. The UN is much more democratic in terms of voting powers than most institutions. For example, Bretton Woods institutions, the IMF or the World Bank, where we have different voting rights and quotas and just a hierarchic structure. Here in the UN, they usually focus on consensus or, in critical cases, in gathering majorities, which obviously favors China. If it can exert an influence in developing countries, then China can have the majorities needed to approve any resolution or to at least advance some of its agenda interests in the UN. So this is a key point in my opinion, the fact that the UN is more democratic. A third reason I would say is that China sees the UN as a tool to decrease competition. China understands that this organization can foster global governance by calling states to flexibilize their interests. China is trying to build this narrative that we should all look to the international system as a whole and not as the sum of individual state interests. So it sees that the UN has the potential to foster this kind of view of the international system as a place to have this global governance. Therefore, the UN can, for example, reduce competition, reinforce stability, which for the Chinese government is crucial. Without a stable international system, they cannot, for example, focus on their national development or their national targets. And finally, the fourth reason, which I believe is image. By contributing more and engaging more with the United Nations, China can help to set the norms and the rules of international system, bringing these structures closer to the Chinese worldview, let's say. And of course, if China is willing to, as I said previously, share the burden of offering international public goods, other countries, especially the developing ones, we'll tend to see China under a positive lenses, and we'll tend to support China and maybe vote with China in some of their interests. So this is why I believe China is very interested and has the UN as a priority at this point.
Is China interested in the United Nations system, like funds, agencies, and programs, etc., etc.? How would you see this the whole scenario?
Yes, I do. I think China is very interested actually in the UN system. As you said, the UN system comprises UN funds, UN programs, offices, departments, specialized agencies, and they are together extremely important to the overall work of the United Nations. And China has consistently increased its engagement in different sectors of this UN system. If we consider, for example, the specialized agencies, China is now has now important position in almost all of them, all the 15 specialized agencies. Currently, China is either among the biggest contributors to their budget, or it has their nationals, Chinese people in high-rank positions of the Secretariat, for example. From what we can gather right now, from the 15 UN specialized agencies, the UN is China is either a great contributor or has its national in high ranks in at least 8 of them. So as you can see, China is putting the UN system also as a priority. And actually, in 2 of these specialized agencies, which are the Food and Agriculture Organization and the UN Industrial Development Organization, China has secured both places. So it's at the same time the biggest contributor, and also it hosts high-ranked positions in the Secretariat. And by that I mean that we have China's officials as either the director general of these specialized agencies, or maybe a second rank director. And of course, that Secretariat is not there to represent national interests. So I'm not trying to say here that because we have Chinese officials in high-ranked positions in the Secretariat, they are somehow advocating Chinese interests. That's not my point, because as we know, even though this may happen sometimes, any Secretariat member should be neutral. So I'm not trying to argue otherwise. But the thing is, it is well known that if you have a great presence in terms of Secretariat composition, you can, of course, strengthen your worldview in the practice of the institution. I mean, it's what the Western countries have been doing for ages, right? So one way of, for example, bringing their view on development or human rights, or maybe gender, is also having at least half of the Secretariat of the UN and the UN system as either Europeans or Americans or other Western countries. And China is aware of this, which is something new. And it has actually it is really making the effort to ensure that more Chinese officials are participating in the UN as Secretariat members, which is really interesting. It really is something for us to pay attention to if we want to understand how important the UN system is to China right now.
Talita, would you able to explain what kind of advantages does China's growing presence brings to the United Nations system?
Well, I believe that China can have considerable advantages by taking the lead in the UN system. And this is why, because the UN system is focused on the implementation of policies, especially those policies related to sustainable development, right? So we have, for example, the development program, UNDP. We have, as I said, Food and Agriculture Organization in this UN system as well, the Industrial Development Organization, and this is where China has great expertise and has great knowledge to share with other countries. Let's face it, China has just got millions out of poverty, and some of their policies, they can be also implemented in other countries. So China has something to say in most of these UN system funds, programs, specialized agencies, which, as I said, are focused on the implementation of policies. And it is also in the UN system that funding is urgently needed. Most of the UN system lacks proper funding, and this is also an area where China can greatly contribute, and obviously also gain greater projection by funding some of the projects in these funds, programs, offices, and so on. So, for example, China is funding for South-South cooperation projects at the Food and Agriculture Organization. In the last few years, China has considerably increased funding directly targeted to projects involving South-South cooperation, which we all know it's one of the main priorities of China to international development. I think this is a great example of a really important advantage that China can have if it decides to focus on the UN system. And also, the UN system is also where different international technical norms and standards are determined. And most of the time, these technical negotiations, they are overlooked for most countries, by most of the countries. Take as an example the specialized agencies again. The World Health Organization, the World Intellectual Property Organization, and even the International Telecommunication Union. They all have key roles in influencing and implementing international norms and standards. I think that in the last year we saw that the World Health Organization, for example, has a great role to play in terms of international health and international practices, and how it's key in combating the pandemic. But these institutions, these specialized agencies, as I said, they are usually not ignored, but overlooked by most countries. And that's why they do not get proper funding or proper attention from most countries. But this is a great error, in my opinion. And it's where China can actually secure a significant advantage. For example, the International Telecommunication Union, it's where the standards regarding the 5G technology are determined. They are being these standards, they are being discussed there right now as we speak. And if China can influence this process, it can also have advantages in the digital economy, which we all know it's the next frontier of international competition and cooperation. So if China can be a relevant player in this International Telecommunication Union, for example, it can try to influence how we see and how we perceive this 5G technology. So I think these are some of the important advantages that China can have from trying to be a leader and to be this responsible actor in the UN system.
Tarita, can China continue its engagement strategy even with the US renewed interest in multilateralism? How would you analyze this?
I think this is the $1 million question that we are all trying to answer right now, but actually I don't think that at this point we can have a proper answer to this question. What we can say is that if China is or is not capable of sustaining this leadership in multilateralism, it will depend on the developments of the next few months or years. And why is that? It's because one of the main reasons why China was able to advance its presence in the UN in the last few years is precisely because the US was moving away from multilateralism under Trump administration. It left the Paris Agreement, it decided to left UNESCO, for example, and it considerably underfunded and cut, or sometimes cut, all the funding to important UN projects. And this void left by the US was progressively taken by China. It gave the chance for China to speak up and to say, okay, if the United States is not willing to compromise, if the United States is not willing to support multilateralism, China is here to take its place. Maybe I think take its place it's too strong, but actually at least China is trying to have more responsibility, let's say, in international negotiations and international public goods. So from what we have seen so far, Biden administration is different. Why is it different? Because it is willing to recover the United States status in the multilateral order. So that void that was there in the UN the last few years will probably not be there in the future, in the close future. And the US, for example, has already returned to many institutions that Trump administration decided to leave, and has reinforced their commitment with some agreements, even Paris Agreement, as I mentioned further. So what we can see now is that we have a different United States. A United States that will probably play safe in terms of multilateralism, and by that I mean we have a United States that will try to regain its leadership in the international spaces that they lost in the last few years. And this is obviously less ideal for China, of course, because as I said, China grew in this American void, and this will definitely not be the case anymore. But I also believe that this renewed interest of the United States in the UN, it can be a chance for China to reinforce cooperation and maybe even to reduce some of the tensions that in the last few years have caused great maybe suffering or disadvantages for most countries, as for example the trade war between China and the United States. I think that the Chinese government is willing to cooperate, and it does want to ensure that cooperation is their main option when in terms of the relations with the United States. Competition for China is not the ideal scenario when it comes to the United States. But I think that for sure Biden administration will bring some obstacles, let's say, to this Chinese policy of engaging in the UN and whenever possible in becoming the leader in international negotiations. Well, that's my point of view right now. Let's see. Let's wait for the next few months to see what happens.
Talita, thank you so much for your valuable, precious analysis and time for our Debate IR program. And thank you so much again for sharing your thoughts on China's growing presence in UN system.
Thank you.
Thank
it was
so
a
much.
pleasure to be here sharing some of my views. Thank you very much.